I never imagined my life would spiral into this twisted game of lies and deceit. I was an ordinary man in every sense of the word, a husband, a business owner, and someone who believed in the sanctity of marriage. My name is Daniel Rivers, and for most of my life, I was content with what I had. My wife, Samantha, was my everything. We met in college, where she was the striking brunette who could silence a room with her presence alone. She had this air of confidence, a certain charm that was impossible to ignore. I remember watching her from across the library, her eyes glued to her books, and I knew I had to meet her. We started with small talk, and eventually I convinced her to go out for coffee. One date turned into a whirlwind romance, and before I knew it, we were married. Our life together seemed perfect. I ran a mid-sized tech firm, and Samantha worked as a freelance interior designer. She was good at it too, creative, meticulous, and passionate about her work. We had a beautiful home, a social circle of friends who envied our bond, and enough money to live comfortably. To anyone looking in, we were the perfect couple. But I suppose that's always how these stories start, isn't it? Lately, things had been different. At first, it was just a feeling, an uncomfortable knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I tried to shake it off, convince myself I was being paranoid. Samantha had become more distant, more preoccupied, but she always had an excuse, a big project, a new client, or feeling tired. I noticed her phone was never out of her sight. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off and called me silly. There were nights she wouldn't come home until late, claiming she had been working on a big job across town. Once or twice, I even caught a whiff of cologne that wasn't mine. I confronted her, and she was quick with her answers, too quick. I could see the flicker of annoyance in her eyes, the sharp edge in her tone, as if she couldn't believe I was questioning her integrity. I wanted to believe her so badly. I wanted to be the good, trusting husband, but the doubts crept in, slow and steady, like a poison seeping into my bloodstream. She started spending more time with a new client, a man named Andrew. I'd met him once, a tall, smug bastard who seemed too interested in my wife's life and mine. He had this easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. The way he looked at Samantha sent a chill down my spine, but she insisted he was just a client, nothing more. "Business is business," she'd say. I nodded, but the unease lingered. Every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong, that she was hiding something. I tried to push the thoughts away, focus on my work, but my mind kept wandering back to those late nights, the whispered phone calls I wasn't supposed to hear, the change in her demeanor. I felt like I was watching our marriage slip away piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. One evening, while she was in the shower, I finally gave in to my suspicions. Her phone lay on the dresser, just within reach. My hand trembled as I picked it up, my heart racing in my chest. I felt like a thief in my own home, violating some unspoken rule. But when I opened her messages, there was nothing. No calls, no texts, nothing out of the ordinary. It was too clean, too perfect. That's when I knew. Someone had been careful, too careful. I spent the next few weeks trying to convince myself I was wrong, that I was imagining things. Maybe I had been working too hard, losing myself in the stress of running a company in an increasingly competitive market. I tried to bury my suspicions in late nights at the office, poring over balance sheets and client contracts, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Andrew's face, that arrogant smirk that seemed to mock me even in my dreams. Samantha, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. She went about her days with a brightness that I hadn't seen in a long time, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. I wanted to believe that she was just busy with her work, caught up in the demands of her projects. But the nagging doubt kept me on edge. I found myself watching her more closely, looking for any sign that might explain her behavior. And then there were the calls. I started noticing them late at night, after she thought I'd fallen asleep. She would slip out of bed, her phone in hand, and disappear into the bathroom or the guest room. The murmur of her voice was soft, just a whisper, but I could hear the smile in her words. When I asked who it was, she said it was a friend, Sarah or Jess, or some other name I didn't recognize. Always a different name. Always some new reason. One evening, as I was finishing up a report at the office, I decided to take a chance. I knew I had to know for sure. I made a call to a private investigator, a guy named Blake, who had been a friend of a friend. He was discreet, professional, and promised he'd find out whatever was going on without tipping anyone off. Blake didn't take long to come back with his findings. He was thorough, almost annoyingly so, but what he showed me sent a cold shiver down my spine. Pictures of Samantha meeting Andrew at a small, out-of-the-way cafe, their heads close together, laughing like they shared some private joke. Photos of them entering a hotel, always at different times, but it was clear what they were doing there. There were other men, too, but none seemed to linger like Andrew did. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, had been living a double life right under my nose. She was playing me for a fool, and I had let it happen. But what hit me hardest was a photograph taken just a few nights ago. It was of Samantha standing by the balcony of our bedroom, the one overlooking the garden. She had a phone to her ear, a smile on her lips, a smile I hadn't seen in months. The caption beneath it read, "Talking to Andrew." I felt the blood drain from my face. There were only two people she could have been talking to on that phone, me or him, and I hadn't called her that night. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. The woman I had given everything to was plotting something behind my back. She was sharing our bed, our life, while keeping secrets that cut deeper than I could have imagined. I couldn't sit still anymore. I needed to confront her, to demand answers, but a small, calculating part of me wanted to know more. I wanted to catch her in the act, to see her face when she realized I knew everything. That's when I made the decision to set a trap. I started coming home earlier, being more attentive, and pretending everything was fine. I wanted to see if she would slip up, if she would let something slip in a careless moment. And slowly, little cracks began to show. Samantha seemed distracted, almost irritated by my sudden attention. She'd laugh a little too hard at jokes that weren't funny, or go quiet when I asked about her day. Her phone never left her hand, always facing down on the table or stuffed into her bag. I began to notice things I had missed before, the way she'd pause when Andrew's name came up, her insistence on meeting clients alone, the strange receipts in her purse from places we never visited together. There was always an excuse, a quick explanation that seemed rehearsed. It was only a matter of time before she made a mistake. And that's exactly what I was counting on. It was a Friday night, and I had told Samantha I'd be working late at the office, dealing with a client who was being difficult about a new contract. She nodded absent-mindedly, barely looking up from her phone, which only deepened my suspicions. I made a show of gathering my things, slamming the front door, and even starting my car so she'd hear me leave. But I didn't go far. I parked a block away, just out of sight, and waited. The minutes ticked by slowly, the air growing colder as the night settled in. I watched our house from the rearview mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I saw a car pull up, a sleek black sedan that I recognized immediately. Andrew. He stepped out, dressed in a tailored suit, his hair slicked back in that arrogant way of his. He didn't bother to knock. Samantha opened the door before he even reached it, like she'd been waiting for him. She glanced around quickly, as if checking for anyone watching, before pulling him inside. I felt my hands clench around the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I knew this was it. I slipped out of my car and made my way back to the house, moving quietly, sticking to the shadows. The front door was slightly ajar, careless, almost arrogant of them. I slipped inside and stood in the hallway, listening. Their voices were coming from the living room, low and conspiratorial. I crept closer, making sure to stay out of sight, and that's when I heard Andrew's voice, clear and filled with contempt. "Your husband is an idiot, Samantha. When are you going to leave him?" His voice was filled with a casual disdain, like he was discussing the weather. I felt a wave of anger surge through me, my blood boiling at the audacity of his words. I edged closer, careful not to make a sound. I needed to hear more. Samantha's reply was like a knife to the heart. "Soon, dear. Once we destroy him and his business, I'm all yours." Her tone was light, almost playful, as if she was talking about a game they were playing. Destroy me, and my business. The words echoed in my head, sharp and piercing. This wasn't just an affair. This was a plot, a betrayal deeper than I had imagined. They were planning to ruin me, to take everything I had worked for. I didn't know what they had planned or how far they were willing to go, but I knew I couldn't let it happen. I took a deep breath, my hand slipping into my jacket, fingers brushing against the cold metal of the gun I had brought with me. I'd bought it months ago, thinking it would make me feel safer, never imagining I'd need it for something like this. I stepped into the doorway, and both of them turned, their expressions changing from shock to fear in an instant. I saw Andrew's hand move toward his pocket, but I was faster. I pulled the gun and aimed it right at them. "What exactly were you planning to destroy, dear ones?" My voice was steady, colder than I'd ever heard it. Samantha's face went pale, her eyes widening in fear. "Daniel, it's not what it looks like." I laughed, a sound that was more bitter than amused. "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like. Go on, tell me more about how you plan to ruin me, Samantha. I'm all ears." Andrew tried to step in, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Now, let's not do anything rash here." I shifted the gun slightly, pointing it directly at him. "Shut up. I'm not talking to you." I turned my gaze back to Samantha, who was still frozen in place, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking for the first time. "Why would you do this to me?" Samantha swallowed hard, her lips trembling. For a moment she seemed to falter, her confidence slipping. Then, as if gathering herself, she straightened her back. "Because I'm tired, Daniel. Tired of being with someone who never truly sees me. Someone who is so wrapped up in his work that he forgets he has a wife." I felt a stab of pain, but I kept the gun steady. "So this is my fault? You think you're justified because you felt ignored?" Her tears vanished, replaced by a glare. "You ignored me, pushed me aside. And Andrew, he listened. He cared." I almost laughed again. "Cared enough to ruin my life? To plot against me?" Andrew's voice cut in. "Look, Daniel, let's be reasonable here." I cocked the gun, the sound echoing in the tense silence. "Shut up." My eyes never left Samantha's. "How far were you planning to take this, Samantha? How far?" She bit her lip, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of regret. But then it was gone, replaced by a cold determination. "As far as it takes," she said softly. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I kept the gun trained on them, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried to make sense of everything, but all I could feel was a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and a sickening sense of disbelief. Samantha stood there, eyes locked on mine, her face hardening into a mask I didn't recognize. Andrew, on the other hand, seemed to be calculating his next move. His eyes darted to the side, looking for an exit or maybe something he could use to his advantage. I knew I couldn't let my guard down for even a second. This was a man who was already plotting my downfall. I wasn't about to give him any more chances. "So, what was the plan?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "What exactly were you going to do to destroy me?" Andrew smirked. "It doesn't matter now, does it? You've already lost." His arrogance sent another wave of rage through me. He still thought he had the upper hand. I took a step closer, pressing the barrel of the gun against his chest. "Try me," I said. "Explain it to me like I'm an idiot, because that's what you called me, isn't it?" Samantha flinched at my words, but Andrew just smiled. that infuriating grin still plastered on his face. "Your business," he started. "We were going to leak some sensitive information, clients, contracts, internal communications, a few well-placed rumors, a few manipulated documents, and your little tech firm would be done for. You'd be left with nothing but debts." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I could see it now, the way they'd worked this out, step by step, planning my downfall while I'd been too blinded by love to see the truth. I had been a fool, trusting the wrong people, and now I was facing the consequences. "And then what?" I demanded, turning my gaze back to Samantha. "You'd just walk away with him? Start a new life on the ashes of everything we built together?" She hesitated, just for a moment. "It's not that simple, Daniel," she whispered. "I didn't want to hurt you. Not like this. But I felt trapped, suffocated in this life with you." "Trapped?" I barked a laugh. "So your solution was to destroy everything? To betray me with him?" I jabbed the gun towards Andrew, who didn't flinch. Andrew's eyes were calculating. "This is getting you nowhere, Daniel. Put the gun down, we can work something out." I shook my head slowly. "There's nothing to work out," I said. "You think I just let this slide? Let you two walk away after everything?" Samantha's face contorted with a mix of fear and defiance. "Daniel, please. This isn't who you are. You don't want to do this." "No," I replied, my voice a low growl. "I don't want to. But you've left me no choice." The room felt like it was closing in, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I could feel my grip on the gun, tightening, my pulse racing. I had them cornered, but what now? What was I supposed to do? I took a deep breath, my eyes flicking between the two of them. I needed to think, to figure out my next move. But before I could, Andrew lunged forward, his hand grabbing for the gun. I reacted instinctively, pulling back and slamming the butt of the gun into his face. He stumbled backward, clutching his nose as blood spurted between his fingers. Samantha screamed, a high-pitched sound that seemed to pierce right through me. "Stop, Daniel, stop!" But I wasn't stopping, not anymore. I'd had enough of their lies, their games. I aimed the gun at Andrew's head, my finger hovering over the trigger. "Tell me," I hissed. "Tell me why I shouldn't pull this trigger right now." Andrew's eyes were wide, fear finally creeping in. "Because," he stammered, his voice strained, "because you're not a killer, Daniel. You're a businessman. You think with your head, not your heart." For a moment, I hesitated. He was right. I wasn't a killer. I'd never wanted any of this. But the rage, the betrayal, it was all too much. I could feel the weight of the gun in my hand, the cold metal pressing against my skin. Samantha took a step toward me, her hands raised in a pleading gesture. "Daniel, please. Just put the gun down. We can talk about this. We can figure it out." I shook my head. "Figure it out? There's nothing left to figure out. You made your choice, both of you did." Her eyes were filled with tears now, her voice trembling. "Daniel, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to come to this." I felt a flicker of doubt, a moment of weakness. Could I really do this? Could I really go through with it? Andrew saw the hesitation and took his chance. "Listen to her, Daniel," he said, his voice steadying. "This isn't you. You're better than this." I clenched my jaw, my finger pressing down harder on the trigger. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, my mind racing. I had them both where I wanted them. But what was I willing to do next? The silence was unbearable, a thick, suffocating weight that pressed down on all of us. I could see the fear in their eyes, feel the tension radiating from their bodies. Samantha's hands were still raised, trembling, her face streaked with tears. Andrew was holding his nose, blood dripping between his fingers, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He was waiting for the right moment, the chance to turn this around in his favor. And I stood there, my finger still on the trigger, my mind spinning. I'd thought about revenge. about how good it would feel to make them suffer like I was suffering. But now, standing here with a gun in my hand, I felt lost, conflicted, the line between right and wrong blurred by rage and betrayal. "Daniel, please," Samantha whispered again, her voice breaking. We can work this out. You don't have to do this." I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. "Work this out? After everything you've done? After plotting to destroy me?" Her eyes were wide, desperate. "I know I messed up. I know I betrayed you. But I didn't want it to end like this. Not like this." Andrew straightened himself, wiping the blood from his face, his eyes cold and hard. "She's right, Daniel. Put the gun down. Think about this." I shook my head slowly. "You think you can just talk your way out of this, Andrew? You think you can manipulate me like you manipulated her?" He smirked, but there was a hint of nervousness behind his bravado. "What are you going to do, Daniel? Shoot us? Throw your whole life away for revenge?" The question hung in the air, and I felt a wave of uncertainty wash over me. I'd always been the rational one, the one who thought things through, who weighed the options. But now I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking into a void. "You've taken everything from me," I said quietly, my voice filled with a mix of anger and pain. "My trust, my marriage, my business. All for what? For this?" Samantha took a step closer, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you, Daniel. I swear, I just felt lost, like I didn't matter to you anymore." I snapped back, my voice like ice. "And so you chose him? You chose to destroy me?" Her tears flowed freely now, her voice barely a whisper. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. But please, don't do something you can't take back." Andrew saw his chance and stepped forward, trying to assert control. "Listen to her, Daniel. You're a smart guy. You don't want to ruin your life over this. We can all just walk away." Walk away. The words echoed in my mind. Could I do that? Could I just walk away and let them think they'd won? That they'd broken me? I felt my grip tighten on the gun, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. My heart was racing, the room spinning around me. I had to decide. I had to make a choice. Samantha suddenly lunged forward, grabbing my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Please, Daniel." "Zrania, just put it down! Please!" The movement caught me off guard, and for a second I stumbled, the gun jerking to the side. Andrew took his chance, leaping toward me, his hands reaching for the gun. I reacted instinctively, pulling back and swinging the gun up between us. A shot rang out, deafening in the small room. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Samantha screamed, a sound filled with pure terror, and Andrew staggered back, his face twisted in shock. Blood spread across his chest, a dark, spreading stain. He looked down, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to say something, but no words came out. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with disbelief. "No! No! No!" he gasped, his voice weak and fading. I stared at him, my mind blank, the gun still smoking in my hand. I hadn't meant to fire. I hadn't meant to shoot. But now it was done, and there was no going back. Samantha dropped to her knees beside him, her hands pressing against his wound, her sobs filling the air. "Oh my God. Oh my God. Andrew. Andrew." I stood there, frozen, watching the life drain out of him. I felt a strange detachment, like I was watching it happen to someone else, like this was some terrible movie and not my life. And then, slowly, reality crashed back in. I'd shot him. I'd shot Andrew. He was dying, right there in front of me, and I had pulled the trigger. I took a step back, my breath coming in shallow gasps, my hand shaking. Samantha looked up at me, her face a mask of shock and horror. "Daniel, what have you done?" I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what I'd done. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. The seconds dragged on like hours as I stared down at Andrew's body. His breath was coming in ragged gasps, his chest heaving with every attempt to draw air. The blood was pooling on the floor, dark and sticky, spreading out like a stain that would never wash away. Samantha was still on her knees, pressing her hands against his wound, her face contorted in terror and anguish. "Call an ambulance!" she screamed, her voice hoarse and desperate. "He's dying, Daniel. Please call an ambulance." I felt numb, like I was outside of myself, watching everything unfold from a distance. The gun was still heavy in my hand, my fingers locked around the grip as if I couldn't let go. Her words barely registered in my mind, drowned out by the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Daniel!" she shouted again, panic rising in her voice. "For God's sake, call someone, help him!" Slowly, I lowered the gun, my mind beginning to clear just enough to realize what had happened. I had shot him. I had actually pulled the trigger. I didn't mean to, but I did. My gaze shifted to Samantha, her eyes wild and pleading, and something inside me hardened. "Why should I help him?" I spat out, my voice cold. "After everything you two planned, after everything you did to me, why should I care if he lives or dies?" Tears streamed down her face, her expression a mix of horror and disbelief. Because you're not a killer, Daniel. You're not like this." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. "You don't know what I am," I muttered. "You never did." Andrew let out a strangled groan, his body jerking as he struggled to stay conscious. The sound snapped me back to reality. I wasn't a killer. At least, not yet. But if I stood there and did nothing, if I just let him die, then what would that make me? Without another word, I grabbed my phone from my pocket and dialed 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons, but somehow I managed. The operator's voice came through the line, calm and professional. "What is your emergency?" I hesitated for a moment, my eyes still locked on Andrew, who was gasping for breath. Samantha's sobs were the only other sound in the room. "There's been a shooting," I said finally, my voice flat and emotionless. "A man's been shh. He's losing a lot of blood. You need to send an ambulance." The operator asked for the address, and I gave it to her, my voice steady even as my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. She told me to stay on the line, to keep pressure on the wound, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stood there, watching as Samantha tried to save the man she'd betrayed me for. Minutes passed like a slow drip of time. I heard the distant wail of sirens, growing louder and louder until they were right outside the house. The front door burst open, and paramedics rushed in, taking in the scene with quick, assessing glances. One of them knelt beside Andrew, pulling out medical supplies, while another gently moved Samantha out of the way. "Ma'am, we need you to step back," he said firmly. She looked at him, her face pale and drawn, but she obeyed, stumbling back a few steps as they went to work. I watched them silently, feeling detached from everything around me. The paramedics worked quickly, shouting out instructions to each other, checking Andrew's pulse, applying pressure to the wound, starting an IV. I could see their faces, the concentration etched into their features, and I wondered if they knew who I was, what I'd done. One of them glanced up at me. "What happened here?" he asked, his tone brisk and professional. I hesitated, unsure of what to say. "It was an accident," I lied, my voice barely a whisper. "The gun, it went off by mistake." He didn't seem convinced, but he nodded anyway. "Stay where you are. The police will be here soon." Samantha turned to me, her face a mask of fear and confusion. "Daniel, please just tell them it was a mistake. We can figure this out. Just don't make this worse." I looked at her, and all I could feel was a deep, burning anger. "You think this can be fixed?" I asked, my voice cold and distant. You think anything will ever be the same again? She opened her mouth to say something, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. Her eyes were filled with tears, her hands still covered in Andrew's blood. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost felt that old familiar pull of love and compassion. But then I remembered everything, her lies, her betrayal, her plan to destroy me. The sound of more sirens filled the air, and moments later, the police arrived. 2 officers came through the door, hands on their weapons, taking in the scene with wary eyes. "Drop the gun!" one of them shouted, and I realized I was still holding it, my knuckles white against the black metal. I nodded slowly and placed the gun on the floor, raising my hands in surrender. "It's over," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. "It's all over." They moved quickly, cuffing my hands behind my back, reading me my rights. I didn't resist. I didn't even speak. I just stared straight ahead, my mind numb, my heart empty. As they led me out of the house, I caught one last glimpse of Samantha, standing there in the middle of the living room, tears streaming down her face, her hands still covered in blood. I couldn't tell if she was crying for me, for Andrew, or for herself. Maybe all 3. I didn't care anymore. It was done. Whatever came next, I'd face it. I'd face it knowing that I'd seen the truth, that I'd made my choice, and that nothing would ever be the same again. The police station was cold, sterile, and suffocating. The walls seemed to close in on me as they led me down the hallway to a small, dimly lit room. They'd taken my gun, my belt, and anything else they thought could be used against me. I was left in a chair, my wrists still cuffed behind my back, my head spinning with everything that had just happened. I kept replaying the moment over and over in my mind. The gun going off, Andrew's eyes wide with shock, Samantha's scream. I could still hear the echo of the gunshot, a sound that felt like it would never leave me. The door opened, and a detective walked in, a woman with short cropped hair and a no-nonsense expression. She had a file in her hands, which she set down on the table with a thud. Her eyes were sharp, studying me carefully as she sat down across from me. "Daniel Rivers," she began, her voice calm and measured. "You've been through quite a lot tonight, haven't you?" I nodded, swallowing hard. My mouth felt dry, my throat like sandpaper. "Yeah," I replied, my voice hoarse. "You could say that." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "We've got witnesses saying there was a gunshot, that you were holding a weapon. You want to tell me what happened?" I hesitated. What could I say that wouldn't make things worse? I knew I had to be careful, that every word out of my mouth could be used against me. "It was an accident," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "The gun went off. I didn't mean to shoot him." She raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "An accident, huh? Then why were you pointing a gun at him in the first place?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Because I found out. I found out they were planning to ruin me. My wife and that man, Andrew, they were plotting against me, to destroy my business, my life, everything." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "And you thought the best way to handle that was to confront them with a gun?" I felt a wave of frustration rising. "I didn't plan to shoot him, I wanted answers. I wanted to know why they were doing this to me. He attacked me and the gun went off. I swear I didn't mean to pull the trigger." She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. "So you admit you were angry, that you wanted to confront them?" I nodded. "Yes, I was angry. They were plotting behind my back, trying to take everything from me. Wouldn't you be angry?" Her eyes softened slightly, but she didn't let up. "I understand being angry, Mr. Rivers, but pulling a gun on someone, that's a different level. You know that, right?" I nodded again, feeling a wave of regret wash over me. I know it was stupid. I just didn't know what else to do." She opened the file in front of her and glanced down at the papers. "And your wife, Samantha Rivers. She's confirmed that there was a struggle, that you and Andrew were arguing, and that the gun went off accidentally. But she also says you were threatening them, saying things that sounded like you were ready to hurt someone. I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. She's lying. She's just trying to protect herself. She knew what she was doing. They both did. The detective sighed, closing the file. Look, Daniel, I'm going to be straight with you. You're in a lot of trouble. A man was shot tonight, and whether it was an accident or not, you're the one who pulled the trigger. The DA is going to want to make an example out of this. You need to start thinking about your defense. I felt a lump in my throat, my heart pounding. Defense? You think they're going to charge me? She nodded. It's very likely. We're talking about a serious assault, possibly attempted murder, depending on what happens to Andrew. You need to get a lawyer, someone who can help you navigate this. I slumped back in my chair, the weight of her words crashing down on me. A lawyer, a trial, the possibility of going to prison. It all felt surreal, like I was watching my life unravel in slow motion. She stood up, her expression softening just a fraction. I'll give you some time to think. But you need to be smart about this, Daniel. The choices you make now are going to determine the rest of your life. She turned and left the room, the door closing behind her with a heavy thud. I was alone again, the sound of my own breathing the only thing I could hear. I leaned forward, resting my head on my hands, trying to clear my thoughts. My mind was a mess of conflicting emotions, anger, regret, fear. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. There was no going back now. I sat in that interrogation room for what felt like hours, the walls closing in, the dim light flickering above me. My thoughts spiraled, every moment of the last few weeks replaying in my mind. Samantha's late nights, Andrew's smug face, the whispers and lies, and finally, that gunshot that shattered everything. I kept thinking about what the detective had said. The choices you make now are going to determine the rest of your life. I needed a lawyer, I knew that much. But more than that, I needed a plan. The system wasn't on my side. I could see how it would play out. A man, armed with a gun, confronting his cheating wife and her lover. A crime of passion, they'd call it. But I wasn't ready to accept that narrative. I wasn't going to be their scapegoat. The door opened again and a uniformed officer stepped inside. "Your lawyer's here," he said, his tone neutral, almost bored. "Come on." I was led down a series of hallways, past offices filled with people who barely glanced up as I walked by in handcuffs. Finally, I was pushed into another small room, this one brighter, with a glass window on one side. A woman was waiting for me, a sharp-looking brunette in her early 40s, dressed in a dark suit, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Rivers, I'm Angela Marks," she said, standing up and extending her hand. "I've been assigned as your public defender." I shook her hand, feeling the cool firmness of her grip. "Thanks for coming," I muttered, still trying to process everything. She nodded, gesturing for me to sit down. "We don't have much time, so I'm going to get straight to the point," she began, her tone brisk and professional. "You're facing some serious charges, Daniel. Assault with a deadly weapon, possibly attempted murder, depending on Andrew's condition. You need to be honest with me if I'm going to help you." I nodded, taking a deep breath. It was an accident. I didn't mean to shoot him. I was angry. I wanted answers, but I didn't plan to kill anyone. She leaned back, folding her arms across her chest. "Okay, let's start from the beginning. Tell me everything. Why you were there, what led up to the shooting. I need to understand your state of mind." I recounted the events, starting with my suspicions about Samantha's behavior, my decision to hire the private investigator, and what he'd found. I explained the confrontation, the tension, how Andrew had lunged at me, and how the gun had gone off in the struggle. Angela listened carefully, not interrupting, her eyes focused intently on me. When I finished, she sighed and leaned forward. "Look, Daniel, I believe you when you say you didn't mean for this to happen. but intent is going to be hard to prove in court. They'll argue you went there with a gun, knowing full well you could use it. We need something stronger. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. What do you suggest? She paused, considering her words carefully. First, we need to figure out how much Samantha is willing to cooperate. Her statement will be crucial. Right now, she's painted you as the aggressor, but we can work on that. If we can show she was complicit in this plan against you, that she and Andrew were trying to manipulate you, we might be able to shift the narrative. I clenched my fists, frustration boiling inside me. She won't help. She's too deep in this. She's scared, and she'll do whatever it takes to save herself. Angela nodded slowly. That's possible. But there's another angle we could explore. The financial one. If we can prove there was a motive on their part, something they stood to gain by ruining you, then we can argue you were provoked, that you acted in self-defense. I blinked, trying to grasp the idea. Financial motive? Like, what? She leaned in closer, her voice lowering. Did you have any life insurance policies, any business deals that could have benefited Samantha or Andrew if you were out of the picture? I thought about it for a moment, and then it hit me. I did have a substantial life insurance policy, one I'd taken out years ago when I first started my business. If something happened to me, Samantha would have been the beneficiary. And my company's shares? If I was gone, my partners would have had to buy her out at a significant profit. I have a life insurance policy, I said slowly, the realization dawning on me. And if I died, Samantha would get everything. The house, my shares in the business, everything. Angela's eyes lit up. That's a start. We can use that to suggest they had a reason to push you, to make you react. It won't be easy, but it's something we can work with. I felt a spark of hope, a small flicker in the darkness. So, what do we do now? She smiled faintly, a hint of determination in her eyes. We dig. We find every piece of evidence that supports your case, and we start building a defense. I'll subpoena phone records, emails, anything that shows they were conspiring against you. And you need to stay calm, stay focused. Don't speak to anyone without me present. Don't give them any more ammunition than they already have. I nodded, feeling a bit of the tension ease from my shoulders. For the first time since that night, I felt like I had a chance, however slim, to fight back, to reclaim some of the life I'd lost. But as she stood up to leave, I couldn't help but wonder, if we found what we were looking for, what other secrets would come to light? And how far was I willing to go to prove my innocence? The days dragged on like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. Every moment was filled with tension, the kind that coils around your chest and squeezes tighter with every breath. Angela was relentless. She dove deep into every detail, tearing through financial records, phone logs, and any clue that could paint a clearer picture of Samantha and Andrew's betrayal. But nothing prepared me for the unexpected blow that would come next. One morning, Angela came in, her face tight with urgency. "Daniel," she said, setting her briefcase down with a thud, "we've got a problem." My heart sank at her tone. "What is it now?" She handed me a stack of papers. I was going through more of the financials and phone records. Something wasn't adding up, so I dug deeper. I found a second shell company, another one Andrew set up. But this one, it's tied directly to Samantha. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath. "It means Samantha wasn't just along for the ride. She wasn't manipulated. She was leading this. She and Andrew were equal partners from the start. They were setting you up, Daniel, to take the fall for something much bigger." The room spun. "Bigger? Bigger how?" Angela leaned forward, her voice low. "They weren't just after your business. They were laundering money through it, using your company as a front. If they had succeeded, you would have been left holding the bag and they'd disappear with everything. And here's the worst part. They'd already begun setting up evidence to frame you as the mastermind. If we hadn't found this in time, you'd have been charged with major financial crimes, not just assault. A wave of nausea washed over me. I thought I'd known the depth of Samantha's betrayal, but this was a different kind of treachery. So, what now? I whispered, feeling the walls close in around me. Angela's face softened, but only slightly. We have to move fast. We have to expose their plan before they find out we're onto them. But Daniel, there's more. She hesitated, like she was bracing herself. What else? I asked, the dread thickening in my chest. She took a breath, eyes locked onto mine. I went to see Samantha, tried to talk to her, see if I could get her to cooperate, to admit what she'd done. And she's gone. I blinked, trying to understand. Gone? What do you mean, gone? Angela's voice was clipped, strained. I mean, she vanished, cleared out her accounts, left town. She's disappeared, Daniel. And the police? They found a note in her handwriting, addressed to you. It reads like a confession. My mind went blank. A confession? Angela nodded. A confession that paints you as the one behind everything. She's flipped the script. Now it looks like you were coercing her, threatening her to go along with your plans. And with Andrew still in the hospital, barely conscious, she's managed to escape any immediate suspicion. A numbness spread through my body. Samantha had played her last card, a card that could destroy me completely. She's setting me up, I muttered, the realization dawning like a punch to the gut. Yes, Angela said grimly. And she's done it well. The police are already looking at you differently. They're piecing together a narrative that fits her story, and with Andrew unable to defend himself, it's your word against a pile of circumstantial evidence she's carefully constructed. My head was spinning. I had thought there was a way out, some path to clearing my name, but now it felt like the walls were closing in, the noose tightening around my neck. I stood up, pacing the small room, trying to think. What do we do now? How do we fight this? Angela's eyes were filled with pity. We find her. That's our only move. We find Samantha before she's gone for good. If we can prove she's been setting this up, we might have a shot. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I could barely breathe. And if we don't find her? Angela's face was solemn. Then, Daniel, you're facing a long time behind bars, and they're going to make sure you take the fall for everything. My hands were shaking. Everything I had, everything I thought I knew, was crumbling. Samantha had vanished, slipping away like a ghost, and left me holding the pieces of a life that no longer made sense. But even as the despair settled in, something else flared up, a dark, stubborn determination. She wouldn't get away with this. Not after everything she'd done. Not after what she'd taken from me. I'll find her, I muttered, my voice a low growl. I'll find her, and I'll make her pay. Angela gave me a hard look. Be smart, Daniel. Don't do anything that will make this worse. I met her gaze, and for a moment I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. Oh, don't worry, I said quietly, feeling a grim resolve settle over me. I'll be smart, but I'll make damn sure she knows there's no running from this. The door opened again, and the officers were waiting, ready to take me back to my cell. I walked out, my mind buzzing with plans, with thoughts of revenge, of justice. I had no idea how I would find her, what it would take, or what I'd do when I did. But one thing was certain. This wasn't over, not by a long shot.